You're a primate. It's roughly 10 million years ago. You're not human yet, you're barely anything yet, and you're standing under a tree that just dropped its fruit. Some of that fruit has been sitting on the forest floor for a few days. It's soft, it's a little mushy, and it smells strong. You eat it anyway, because you're hungry, and calories are calories. And then something happens. You feel warm. You feel loose. You feel, for lack of a better word, good. Congratulations. You just had humanity's first drink, and you weren't even human yet. This is the story of how our species learned to drink. Not wine tastings, not frat parties, not the guy at the wedding who insists on one more toast. We're talking about the actual biological and archaeological origin of alcohol consumption. And here's the thing nobody tells you. Drinking doesn't start with beer, it doesn't start with agriculture, and it definitely doesn't start with humans. The taste for alcohol might be older than our entire genus, older than fire, older than tools, and the evidence for that is genuinely wild. Let's start with chemistry, because before you can drink alcohol, something has to make it, and nature has been making it for longer than there's been anyone around to enjoy it. Alcohol, specifically ethanol, is what you get when yeast eats sugar. Any piece of ripe fruit sitting on a forest floor, absorbing wild airborne yeast, warming in the sun, is a tiny natural brewery. No humans required, no intention required, just time, sugar, and yeast, doing what yeast has done for over 100 million years, since long before primates existed at all. Which means that for the entire span of primate evolution, our ancestors were living in forests absolutely littered with naturally fermenting fruit. And this is where it gets interesting, because our bodies didn't just tolerate that, they adapted to it. In 2014, a team led by biologist Matthew Kerrigan found something remarkable in our DNA. Around 10 million years ago, a single mutation appeared in a gene called ADH4, one that dramatically boosted our ancestors' ability to break down ethanol. That mutation shows up right around the time our ancestors were shifting from swinging through trees to walking on the ground, where fallen, fermenting fruit would have been impossible to avoid. In other words, evolution didn't hand us the ability to metabolize alcohol efficiently by accident. It happened at exactly the moment fermented fruit became a bigger part of the diet. Biologist Robert Dudley built an entire theory around this called the Drunken Monkey Hypothesis. His argument? Our attraction to the smell and taste of alcohol isn't a modern flaw, it's an ancient survival tool. Right, fermenting fruit was a reliable calorie source, and the smell of ethanol was a signal that said, "Over here, food," before you could even see it. And we're not the only ones. In 2008, researchers studying pen-tailed tree shrews in Malaysia found they regularly drink fermented nectar from the burdum palm with an alcohol content that would put most beers to shame, sometimes multiple times a night, for months, without ever acting drunk. Their bodies just process it. So the taste for alcohol isn't a human invention. It's a deep evolutionary inheritance, one we happen to share with a tiny nocturnal mammal that's been quietly day drinking, or rather night drinking, for millions of years. Now here's where we have to be careful about timelines, because a species being biologically primed to enjoy alcohol and a species deliberately brewing it are very different claims. So let's talk about what the archaeology actually says. For a long time, the earliest confirmed evidence of intentional alcohol production came from Rockafet Cave in Israel, where in 2018 archaeologists studying the Natufian people, a hunter-gatherer culture, found stone mortars with residue consistent with malting and brewing grain into a beer-like beverage. That dates to around 13,000 years ago. 13,000 years ago. Before farming, before pottery, before permanent settlements as we usually picture them. People were brewing something recognizable as beer while still living as hunter-gatherers. And that timing matters, because it feeds into one of the most genuinely controversial ideas in archaeology, the beer before bread hypothesis. Some researchers, going back to a 1953 proposal and revived by archaeologists studying sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, argue that humans may have started deliberately cultivating and storing wild grain not primarily to make bread, but to make beer. Not everyone agrees, but the fact that it's a live debate at all tells you something about how badly we wanted this drink. Let's jump forward to China, to a site called Jiahu, where archaeologist Patrick McGovern analyzed pottery jars dating back roughly 9,000 years. Chemical residue inside showed traces of a fermented drink made from rice, honey, and fruit, likely hawthorn or wild grape. This is currently one of the oldest chemically confirmed fermented beverages on the planet. And it wasn't a primitive afterthought. It was a deliberate recipe, mixing multiple ingredients, made consistently, in vessels built specifically to hold it. By the time we reach Sumer, around 1800 BC, we have something even rarer than residue. We have a recipe, written down in the form of a poem. The hymn to Ninkasi, dedicated to the Sumerian goddess of beer, describes the entire brewing process in verse, step by step. Beer wasn't a vice in ancient Mesopotamia. It was currency. Workers were literally paid in beer rations. Archaeologists at a site called Göbekli Tepe in Iran even found the residue of beer stone, calcium oxalate buildup, inside jars dating back over 5,000 years, essentially the world's oldest six-pack. And just like smoke was medicine before it was recreation, so was alcohol. The Ebers Papyrus, that same ancient Egyptian medical text from around 1550 BC, includes over 100 prescriptions that use beer as a base, a way to deliver herbs into the body that was easier to swallow, and frankly, more pleasant than most ancient medicine. Beer wasn't just something you drank after work in ancient Egypt. It was something a doctor might prescribe. This wasn't unique to the Old World either. In the Andes, people were fermenting maize into chicha thousands of years ago, central to feasts, labor exchanges, and religious offerings. In Mesoamerica, pulque, fermented from agave sap, was tied to the goddess Mayahuel and was so sacred that in many periods, drinking it outside of ritual context was heavily restricted, sometimes only permitted for the elderly or the priesthood. Just like tobacco, alcohol across most of human history wasn't a casual, everyday habit. It was controlled, ritualized, and treated with something close to reverence. Which brings us back to that idea from earlier, the fourth drive. Psychopharmacologist Ronald Siegel argued that the pursuit of intoxication sits alongside hunger, thirst, and sex as a basic biological drive, present across the animal kingdom, not unique to us. And there's a real evolutionary logic to why a species would keep chasing this feeling. Shared drinking rituals build trust fast. A group of people who let their guard down together, who become vulnerable together, bond in a way that's hard to replicate sober. In a world where your survival depended on the group trusting you, that mattered. The toast wasn't just a nice gesture, it was social technology. Here's where the story turns uncomfortable. For most of human history, alcohol was slow to make, low in strength, and wrapped in ritual that kept consumption in check. That changed with distillation, refined by chemists in the medieval Islamic world and later spread through Europe, which could turn a mild fermented drink into something many times stronger. What took thousands of years to become a careful, sacred practice became, within a few centuries, a mass-produced, high-proof industry. And today, the World Health Organization states plainly that no level of alcohol consumption has been proven safe. Which raises an odd question to end on. If the drive is this old, this deep, and this universal, is it even a... Maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe the question isn't whether humans were ever going to stop drinking. Maybe it's whether our Stone Age instincts were ever prepared for the modern world. Our ancestors weren't surrounded by shelves stocked with distilled spirits or industries engineered to maximize consumption. They found alcohol in fallen fruit, in seasonal harvests, in drinks that took days or weeks to make, and in cultures that wrapped those drinks in ritual, celebration, and limits. Evolution prepared us for scarcity. Civilization created abundance. And that gap between ancient biology and modern technology explains far more than alcohol alone. It's the same story behind sugar, gambling, social media, and countless other things our brains evolved to seek, but never evolved to regulate in unlimited supply. So the next time you raise a glass, you're participating in a story that didn't begin with kings, taverns, or breweries. It began beneath the trees, millions of years before the first city was built, with a hungry primate, a piece of overripe fruit, and a few wild yeast cells quietly changing the course of our evolution. Sometimes the oldest parts of being human aren't